Good morning, everyone. Just to break the ice, I'll let you know I'm wearing bright pink underpants. I love this picture because to me, I know it's sort of cynical, but it tells me so much about what we've lost over the years, what we've given away in the name of achieving happiness through economic growth. But I won't go into that too much further. My talk is a series of proposals, really, like a design process. I want to throw things out there. It's not necessarily tied together at the end, but hopefully you'll be able to go away with answering some questions and asking yourself some questions that you didn't think needed to be asked. I was lucky to do environmental science. That's my background. I started there in the mid-1970s, unfortunately. That's a long time ago. But it was quite an enlightened era post the 73 oil crisis. So we were taught a little about a lot. And it was an interesting enculturation into thinking. We were taught about archaeology, economics, anthropology, maths, stats, chemistry, physics, economics, social science, political science, a whole range of things. And the reason we were taught that is because back then, and I think it's still true, that was the nature of the problems that the environmental problems that we were going to be confronting in the future. The Club of Rome, it was 1976, the Club of Rome had just come out, and I think it's sort of ironic about how right were they. So, I want to talk a bit about sustainability, or sustainment, I call it, and I'll explain that. I'm going to try to avoid the sustainability word because it's been sort of abused over the years. So I use this term sustainment. To me, sustainability is concerned with the use of technology and practices and a whole range of thinking to sustain what is an inherently unsustainable system. I guess I'm sort of sorry to say that, but I think it's true. Whereas sustainment, the term I like to use, is more concerned with an ecological approach. And in a sense, it's more concerned with, it's more poetic. And it's concerned with our long-term survival and how we survive. And it's got two parts to it. One is the pragmatic. How can we live in a way that is able to be sustained? But importantly, the other part is, how can we live in a way that is sustaining of us and the place that we live in? So sustainment really requires the reconstruction of our desires and the way we want to live. And I'll try to go into that a little bit in a minute. I'll put up this next interesting slide. I like this Nietzsche, and if you could take a minute to read that. There's two parts to this quote, and you can see I put the little dots in there. And excuse the sick and the old-fashioned language, but this gives us makes two important points. The first part is what makes us unsustainable, what it is that's limiting our future, taking our desires beyond all bounds and limits of the planet. ... And it gives us a clue as to how we can move forward. We can become the Superman, we can become the superhuman and have those characteristics. And I'll leave that up there for a little while for you to contemplate. The other important thing about sustainability or sustainment or whatever term you want to use is that it's actually not first and foremost about saving the planet. It's actually an anthropocentric endeavour. We're worried about ourselves. We are concerned with our survival. Now, of course, we can't survive if we don't sustain the planet. So what are we, I'm talking about sustainability. What is the foundation behind all that? So I'd really like to look at this, the environment. And I think, there's a lot of time spent discussing what the environment actually is and trying to define it. But I think the answer is simpler and sort of more devious than what we actually are used to thinking. The environment is simply everything. It's what's outside us, as philosophers would say, the biophysical, some people would talk. It's us. It's the relationships between us. And it's all that horrible stuff that goes on inside our heads, all the intellectual, emotional experience, psychological things that go on. So the environment is outside us. it's us, it flows between us, and it flows through us. And I think that that is a really important perception. I was taught that in my environmental science course, that the environment is everything, and we needed to remember that. And I think that that's foundational. That perception, that perspective on what the environment is really foundational and essential to sustainability. What that really also means is that, and I'll put up this slide, nothing but environment. I love it. I love that term. What that means is that culture, the way we live, cannot be separated from the environment, and arguably they're actually just they're one and the same thing. Now, the environment, because it is everything, is obviously slightly complex. And that's what humans have done through religion and through science and through other ways of thinking. Through the years have tried to deal with a complex environment. Now, I'll bag science slightly for a minute, but what science, and I blame Descartes. It started with the Enlightenment, about the idea that we can understand the world by breaking it up into little bits, and as science calls them, variables, and then doing experiments, and then through rational logic, building up a picture of the world piece by piece, or expanding that little experiment and what it means for our model of the world. The trouble is that unless every variable is tested and every little piece of rational logic and every assumption is covered, then the whole conclusions about the world is debatable. So the tobacco industry lived on that for 50 years. The climate denial now lives on that. So I don't mean to bag science, and I think it's really valuable, but I think that we also need a better way of thinking about the world, and that's my argument, is that that's what design is. My sort of proposition is that design is actually a way of thinking that is absolutely essential to our future, and we all need to engage in it. And I'll try to explain why as quickly as I can. Now, as it turns out, I'd always been a designer without realising it, even before I did my architecture course. My father and I always designed things. We told stories to each other through little bits of paper and drawings, and we designed things that we needed. My parents were the product of the Great Depression, so we designed things that we needed, things that we didn't want to or couldn't buy. And the important thing about that designing was that it involved these stories, and it was always tied to making, and it was an important part of our lives, and in a sense we were designing ourselves. And the joy of the designing wasn't just the product, it was also the process of designing that was important to us. And the stories that went with it, and so forth. Now, we're all designers. What is design? Design is the very thing that makes us human. It's not something that is specially held by people like me who are, designated capital D designers. When I did an architecture course, I didn't realise that I could only design buildings. That you can't just design whatever you want. And so if I go into interior design or landscape or something like that, people start getting very cross. And I think that that's really unfortunate. And if you can see what I'm saying about, going back to what I was saying about the nature of environmental problems, it's also very debilitating in terms of the problems that are facing us and that are coming towards us from the future. Henry Thoreau said that architects only ever design graveyards. And Henry Thoreau is just, if you've read it, he's just brilliant. And the reason is because people kill themselves to get that latest stylish cornice, as he says. So design is what makes us human. It's the way that we have made ourselves in the world, our way in the world. It's a social process. Design is not something that's held by individuals. And if anything, designers, like me and other people, designers with a capital D, we actually have a responsibility to not be the sole holders of design, but to go out and to gather the imaginations, the stories, the ideas, the creativity, if you want to call it, of people, and bring that all together to designing our future and designing something a process, a thing, or something that goes into the world, or ways of living that go into the world and make it a better place. So design is fueled by knowledge, understanding, visions, stories, information, and it's fueled, and this is where I'm unbagging science, it's fueled by specific knowledge. So a designer is someone that has a broad picture, can bring all this information together, but how can I say this? Brings it all together and then forms the visions and then takes it back out to society. So this is design. That's all it is. You and I do it every day. Very simple process. Come up with an idea, see if it works. If it doesn't, change it, so forth. This is important. Through what we design ourselves. And I'll just hold up my iPhone. How much has that designed you or me over the last 15 minutes? Now, and that's how it works. I don't have time to go into that, and I'd love to. And I think if you can just capture that little diagram in your mind and see how design, not only does we design ourselves through what we design, but what we design keeps going on designing forever. Stories. Now, a friend of mine, Rachel Nolan, was asked to make a comment on whether politics was broken, and if it was, how could it be fixed? And she said that what politicians don't have is stories anymore that they're passionate about. And I'll just quickly illustrate the value of stories. That is 4.4 kilometres of crocheted stainless steel, silver-coated copper wire. It says so much about the place it was made and the people that live there. It's from Finland, and the amazing talent of the person that made it. This is a house in Finland in a little place called Fiskars. It's a ceramic artist studio and house. I'm running quickly out of time here. Where and trees had to be demolished from the site, taken away from the site. It was used to make the house, but it was also used to make the furniture, the joinery, and a whole lot of components of the site. This amazing chair, if I could tell you the stories about the person that designed it and the status they're held in Finland, the history of the design and the value of that design brought as a traditional design brought into a contemporary form, and that amazing curly birch timber, full of stories, and I could go on. And the stories connect not just the factual botanical stuff about the timber, but also all the emotional, the experiential, and the spiritual aspects of that whole thing. I love this story about the black tiles. As you do when you're living in Finland and you've chopped down trees and made your house and all your furniture, you then gather all the waste material, the branches from the trees, and use them to heat your house and your sauna. And because you're a ceramic artist, you collect the ash and use that to make the black glaze for your kitchen tiles. And when I told the woman, that's amazing, she said, but of course I would do it. I've had the ash, why wouldn't I do that? And I think that that's something I'm trying to get at, is that shift in attitude. This is made from all recovered materials, this little instrument. Queensland White Beech, if you're into timber, you'll know about Queensland White Beech, how amazing it is. And it turns out acoustically it's brilliant as well. Not only is it durable, amazingly workable and everything, but it's incredible material. The neck was recovered firewood waste, Queensland maple, from an old joinery in Brisbane. The fretboard was studs framing from what were ostensibly dark rooms, but it was on an old industrial building in the valley, and it's actually probably a brothel, but we won't go into that. And hopefully that little instrument, the young fella that's now got it, will go on telling stories with that material and tell the stories of the material and the guitar and where it came from and all those bits, but also tell his new stories with the music he writes and performs with that instrument. So the problems that we face, I'd argue these days, the problems are not cosmological. They're necessarily. They're not necessarily to do with the Hadron Collider. They're not to do with the Hubble telescope. They're, in a sense, the blue sky is actually at our feet and in the ground in front of us. So I'd ask you all to engage in design in two ways. One is at a social level, to gather yourselves as designers, and I'm working on a project in Charleville, and look for opportunities to become designers and to gather information and to establish stories and visions about your future in wherever you can. I'm working on a project in Charleville where we're actually gathering people's visions and trying to make design part of the local governance. The first thing you need to do if you're to protect your visions from people or interests that would easily sell the future or eat the future, as Tim Flannery says, is to come up with catalysts, do things now that will carry on into the future. The other thing that you need to do then is, going back to those little chairs and bits and pieces, is to start to learn to design, to make and bring stories to things for yourself at an individual level. Marco Tontula, another Finnish guy, talks about how the stories go, they build things to last for 3 generations at least, and they improve in value and become more beautiful as they gather stories from their use. And I put this is my favourite picture, Ian Fairweather. I just think he's amazing. And this is him in his little shack on Bribie Island. And it really just sort of says to me that you don't need much stuff to produce incredible value and to contribute to the world and to society and to the economy. You don't need much. Thank you.